Hello everybody, it's Grandmama. Time for another story from a hometown scrapbook by Ben Weatherwax. A.M. Simpson. Hello there. Did you ever wonder where Simpson Avenue got its name? It's a roundabout way to get a name. No one named Simpson had a homestead on the street in its early days, and no Simpson owned the land through which the street ran. No Simpson was mayor of Hoquiam or Aberdeen in the dark days of the long ago when that street was platted. No Simpson promoted the real estate that lay between the two cities. There was no President Simpson and no General Simpson to be honored. So how did the people of Grace Harbor happen to dub that stretch of concrete that today connects Hoquiam and Aberdeen with the name of Simpson? Well, it's a long story, a story of a pretty remarkable man. You guessed it, the man's name was Simpson. He never lived on Grace Harbor, yet he exerted a terrific influence on the harbor's economy, and he visited here many times. His ships came and went across the harbor bar. He owned property here and provided the harbor with a payroll and industry. Grace Harbor honored the man named Simpson. The millions of Americans who have heard his story know him by an entirely different name. So when George has taken his customary few seconds for our sponsor, we'll tell you the story of Captain A.M. Simpson, a most remarkable man, and the street that today bears his name. But first, George, a word from our sponsor. It was in the little seaport town of Bath, Maine, that the Simpson family, 3 generations of seafaring and shipbuilding folk, noted the arrival of a new member. It was 1826. 23 years later, the new arrival and his 2 brothers were all working in the family shipyard at Bath. They were A.M., the one we are most interested in, L.P., and Robert. They learned their trade, they saved their money, and when each was in their 20s, he struck out for himself. A.M. had learned the shipbuilding trade, and with his nest egg in hard-earned dollars, he purchased a 1/3 interest in a schooner Birmingham, being outfitted from his father's yard. And, as we noted, it was 1849. The gold fever that had started at Sutter's Mill on the Pacific coast in a new country called California had worked its way to the far coast of Maine, and there was feverish activity to get vessels started for the new and rich field. One of the first to cast off for the long voyage around the Horn was the Brigham. A.M. Simpson was its supercargo. On the 12th of April 1850, the vessel arrived in the Golden Gate State, and one of the most remarkable men ever to lend his talents to the shaping of a new empire had arrived at his first land of promise. Hardly had the ship docked, hooked up, then the crew swarmed ashore and headed for the gold camps. The Brigham was left without a crew, and Simpson wasn't one to wait at the rail for a new one to sign on. In a week, he was working in a gold camp near Stockton. He heaped up $1,500 in 5 months of panning for the precious metal, then plunged into a shipping venture with his share of the Birmingham as a pledged asset. He had soon lost the $1,500 and the vessel, and he later noted he picked himself up off the floor and started over. We note this because of all the builders who helped to hand-hew the wilderness. Few went down more times than this remarkable Mr. Simpson, and none got up more times than this remarkable Mr. Simpson. With a little eloquence and a lot of imagination, Simpson went into the lumber business. He knew nothing of manufacturing lumber, but he knew what was done with it, and he sought to combine his shipbuilding training and his knowledge of ships and the rich stands of timber to the north up the Pacific coast. He knew that the market existed in San Francisco. He explored the Oregon coast before settling on Coos Bay for his first venture. He built a mill there, and when that was producing, built another at Astoria. That was in 1852. When the coal mines opened in Coos Bay a few years later, Simpson built vessels to carry the coal south to San Francisco. The Astoria mill failed. He lost 3 vessels carrying coal. He kept right on, and people were coming to expect things of the young man called A.M. Simpson. And in 1881, he began to look further north. The timber was bigger, the ports better, and the haul longer. The winds were stronger. He sent one of his most trusted employees, a young man named George Emerson, north to take a look at things. And George Emerson landed on Grays Harbor at the mouth of the tidal stream called the Hoquiam River. The story from there on should be pretty plain to any Grays Harborite who has lived here more than a decade. George Emerson shopped around the harbor for a site. When Ed Campbell asked what Emerson considered too much for a trunk of tide land on the Hoquiam River, the industrialist bought from the James family and began to erect a sawmill that stands in that part today. There had been a small water power sawmill at Cosmopolis, but the new plant that was to be called Northwestern Mill was Grays Harbor's first real sawdust maker. It gave Hoquiam a start with a payroll, and soon after it began to saw lumber. Emerson cleared the site adjoining for a shipyard. That was the pattern of A.M. Simpson's projects. Build a mill, then add a shipyard. Hoquiam's branch of the Simpson firm followed the approved pattern exactly. Simpson sent young Tom McDonald up from California to be the superintendent of the building of the yard and the first ship. He cast about for a crew of workmen and found enough carpenters on the harbor to complete his crew. A young Adsa man named Sam Ben took a job with him, and in 1886 the first ship ever built on Grays Harbor went down the waves of Simpson Hoquiam's yard, the schooner Pioneer, loaded with lumber from the deck of the Northwest Mill. It was soon outward bound for the Golden Coast. All up and down the coast, the A.M. Simpson ventures were setting up, yes, and burning down. The New England sailing master turned Western builder had uncommonly bad luck with his mills. The Northwestern burned to the ground, but like most of his other mills, Simpson rebuilt. He never carried fire insurance on his mills or insurance on his vessels, and the toll that he paid to the sea and the fires through his years of operation was enormous. Fire alone took more than $1.5 million of Captain Simpson's operating fund. Coos Bay on the Oregon coast remained the center of the captain's activities, and there he expanded his activities, founding the city of North Bend. His shipbuilding progress wrote the story of ships on the Pacific coast. From 2- and 3-masted schooners, he progressed to 4-, 5-, and 6-masters, and every ship was designed by the captain himself. No drawing board designer. The old salt shifted his models from soft wood and fitted the little ships with spars, masts, and sails, then ordered his yards to build like the models. In the early teens, when the old shipyard office of the Simpson Company in North Bend was torn down to make way for a new railroad line, more than 80 ship models were found in the attic, and a model for every ship ever built in his yard. And from sails, he went to steam schooners, experimenting with pioneering the building of those little sea-going specialties that were so familiar on the Pacific coast during the first 40 years of the century. While Coos Bay was the captain's main operating base, his headquarters remained in San Francisco, and the ships of A.M. Simpson were known all over the world. In the shipping offices of the firm worked a young writer, Peter B. Kine, who never ceased to marvel at the color and character of his employer, and when he began to write seafaring novels for the nation to eager readers, A.M. Simpson was a prominent figure in the cast under the name of Cappy Ricks. One of Simpson's young captains found his way to Kane's books too. He was an Aberdeen man named Matt Peasley who sailed through Kane's yarns under his own name. But whether it was Cappy Ricks that the maritime world marveled at, or A.M. Simpson, the figure who pioneered West Coast shipping, was the principal saltwater man of the New West. Now, here's George and a word from our sponsor. Yes, A.M. Simpson was the name that dominated West Coast shipping when Robert Dollar was still beating sails before the mast, and the captain always had time to inspect his ventures. So every so often he made port in Grays Harbor to look over the rebuild of the Northwestern Mill. When N. Campbell platted his East Hoquiam addition, he honored that man when he had been responsible for Hoquiam's first industry. The 5th Street back from the harbor he named Simpson Avenue. When the Ontario addition was plotted, the street was extended, and when Herman's addition to Hoquiam was completed, the street ran to the Aberdeen line. There, Aberdeen plotters picked up the street and extended it through the city's west end. And today, the traffic link that ties together the two cities honors the sailorman from Bath, Maine, who built the saltwater empire on the Pacific coast under the name of A.M. Simpson, but who built his most impressionable niche in the hearts of the nation as the colorful, salty, hard-bitten, old, torn-down East Ender of Peter B. Kyne's novels called Cappy Ricks, who tonight we add a page in our hometown scrapbook. Thanks for listening.